right, we want to welcome everybody to today's Wednesday webinar here at TimeSolv. Good morning to everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you happen to be located. I'm Scott Clayson, coming to you from cool and rainy Minneapolis, about 45 degrees and a steady rain here the last few days. For those of you down near the Gulf Coast area, hopefully you're somewhere obviously safe as we prepare for yet another hurricane, it sounds like. I'm the marketing director here at TimeSolv. I'm going to be your host today as we walk through the tips and tricks to get the most out of the TimeSolv product. Just a quick recap, we do send out the tip of the week email generally on Monday mornings, where we try to provide ongoing education on new things within our product or features you may have forgotten about since you had your training, or maybe just plain never even knew that we had these features. So this is kind of like, you know, I know a lot of attorneys have to do CLE. So this is like TimeSolv CLE, a continuing TimeSolv education. So we do these the second Wednesday of each month. So mark your calendars if you'd like right now that our next one will be on Wednesday, November 14th. A couple of housekeeping items as usual before we get started. This webinar should last about 45 to 60 minutes. Everyone is on mute on the webinar. There is a chat icon in the upper right-hand corner of your screen where you can ask questions as we're going through the webinar. And I do always ask for people to please refrain perhaps from asking a question until I've completely gone through a particular subject, and we'll do questions and answers at the end, because I often find that you might have a question that I'm about to answer 30 seconds later. So that's why I do ask to hold off. I want to welcome everyone to attending. I see some familiar names here amongst the list of attendees, Tony, Lisa, Allison. I'm sure I'm missing some others that are here frequently. I love to see the consistency of people who are trying to get the most out of TimeSolv, and I hope you guys find value in this and in doing it every month. So let's go ahead and get started and talk about our 4 topics for the month. So today we're going to talk about, and we've done this before for those of you that have been in many of these webinars, we tend to circle back to working with contacts within TimeSolv. We try to do it about once a quarter at least, only because our support people have reported back to me that this is a question that often comes up on how to manage your contacts within TimeSolv. And, you know, to be perfectly blunt, it's not probably the most intuitive part of TimeSolv, dealing with contacts and making sure the right contacts are placed on the invoices that you create. So I'll run through that again here in today's webinar. We're also going to talk about something that you probably learned a lot about when you first started using TimeSolv, or hopefully you did, and that is in how to set up the billing templates itself. We call them our flexible billing templates. Want to make sure everyone is aware of how you can edit the billing templates, how to create multiple billing templates, because you can create as many billing templates as you'd like, and how to apply them to particular clients and matters. So we'll run through that. We'll go through, again, how to add interest to your invoices. A couple of, maybe 2 webinars ago, maybe it was even the last webinar, we talked about how one of the new features we just came out with was the ability to create interest-only invoices. So if you have a client who perhaps there's no new work that you've done for them in the last billing period that you're generating invoices for, it will still now generate an actual interest-only invoice if you do charge interest on unpaid balances. And so we'll go through just in general how to make sure that how to add interest if that's something that your firm is going to do. And then last, we're going to cover about integrations with LawPay. LawPay is the kind of the de facto standard credit card processing merchant in the legal industry, and we do have a integration set up so that your clients can pay their invoices via credit card using LawPay right through our client portal. In other words, you don't have to send your clients somewhere else You don't have to send them to a LawPay link. You don't have to manually enter it in through your LawPay portal if you have LawPay. They are married together. And one thing that I think is important as well, for that a lot of people don't necessarily know, is it's not just credit card payments that LawPay will process. If you want your clients to still pay by check, or essentially having money removed from their checking account, what's called an ACH payment, that can also be processed with LawPay. So you can give that option to your clients to pay you via either a credit card or from an ACH payment. So we will cover how you integrate your LawPay account, if you have one, with your TimeSolv account, so you can start receiving those payments right through our client portal. So that is the agenda for today. So without further ado, let's get started and talk about working with contacts. So where we're going to go with this is we're going to first take a look at where you can create contacts. And there's a couple different places within TimeSolv where you can actually create a contact. Then we'll show you how to, or I'll show you how you assign those contacts to your matters and your clients. And then most importantly for a lot of people is determining which contact, if there's multiple contacts for a client or matter, is going to show up on the invoice. And I'll come back to this hierarchy display here in a few minutes when we get there. And then one last thing is checking for duplicates. We have found that what oftentimes will happen is people will create a contact at the client level, and then they'll create a whole new contact at the matter level for the same contact. And through what I show you, you should see that you don't have to do that. And B, I will show you that if you do have duplicate contacts, how to find them and how you can go about merging them. So let's go ahead and get into the TimeSolv account itself. So hopefully this looks very familiar to everybody. As you can see, I'm logged in. I'm on the time entry screen where you log in. So let's. Whoop, sorry about that. I didn't mean to. Hold, please. Let's get back to where I was. So let's talk about where you actually go to create a new contact. TimeSolv is, we do have a lot of practice management type of features, but we're not a true like CRM, which is the term, contact or customer relationship management software, to necessarily, manage everything about a contact. But obviously, the most importantly for most people here, you want to make sure that you have the right people associated with your clients and matters who need to receive the invoices that you're going to be generating in TimeSolv. So the first place where you can create a contact, this would be perhaps before you've even decided this person is going to be a client, is you could go under just contacts here under the client menu. So I went under clients and contacts, and this is where you're going to see a list of all the contacts that are in the system, and you can create a new contact right here. And so as you create that contact, they'll just be sitting in the system. They're not going to be associated with any client or any matter. So that's the first place, and maybe not the most obvious place or that you would go to create a contact. Where a lot of people are probably going to do it is when they're actually creating a new client and a new matter. So let's walk through how you would do that. So we're going to go to clients and matters here, and I want to create a new client. And this is going to be October webinar client. I can't believe it's October already. I don't have any matters set up yet, but I do know that perhaps in this situation that my main contact is the only contact I'm going to have to receive, invoices. So I'm going to go under the contacts tab right here. And by default, when you land in the contacts area, it's going to show you any contacts that are already associated with this client. In this case, obviously, there's none because we just created this client. And you can see associated here. However, if you already have a contact that is in TimeSolv, maybe it was somebody that you had a phone call with and you just created as a contact in TimeSolv knowing they were going to become a client later, whatever it might be, here is a place where you can associate that contact, pre-existing contact, with this client. You would just simply click on this drop-down menu and say all. hit search, and now it's going to find all of my contacts that I have here. And I could come over here and say it's going to be Goofy Dog. I could come over to Goofy Dog and hit associations, and I could say, well, you can see Goofy Dog's already associated with July webinar and Wednesday webinar client, and I could search for my October. Oh, sorry. No, I take that back. You can, hang on. Let me go back to this here. When we go back and look at Goofy Dog, we could come in here and we want to associate him with the October client. So I should be able to do that right here. And I don't know why it's not showing me the actual client. Maybe because I don't have a matter set up yet. Okay, well, that's a bad example, Scott. So let's go back and just create a new contact here in this area. This is an area as well where you can create a new contact for October webinar. And let's talk about the different types of contacts that you can create. And this is where it can get tricky sometimes. By default, we're going to say this is the main contact. That means this is the person that by default, unless you have any other type of contact associated, will be placed on the invoice itself when you go to send the invoice. So let's create a new person here. I'm going to call it Randy Grossman, let's say. The title is President. And we're simply just going to save them, and they are now, instead of saying associated, you can see Randy Grossman is now associated as the main contact here. Now, if say Randy Grossman is the president, but he's already told you, I don't want to be the one receiving the invoices. I have my accounting department doing that, and that's going to be somebody else. That's going to be Joe Green, or let's say the person's name is Mike Webster, whatever it might be. So we're going to create another contact who's going to be the one to receive all the invoices. And in this case, their type should be optional invoice. So then I'm going to say this is going to be, what was the name that I said? Mike Webster. Okay. The way TimeSolv works now is it'll first look at the client level for, is there any contact associated with the client who is marked as an optional invoice? If it is, they're the name and email and address and everything else that will be placed on the actual invoice. And let me go back to this. It first looks at the matter level. And if nobody's designated at the matter level, it's going to move up to the client level. Okay. And it's going to say, is there anybody marked as optional invoice? And the answer was yes, it is Mike Webster. They're going to be placed on the invoice. If there's nobody marked as optional invoice, it's going to say, is there a main contact? Yes. Okay. Let's put them on the invoice. So I hope that's fairly clear. Here's another thing that I didn't talk about yet when showing you that association. Excuse me. As you create matters, if the same contact at the client level should be receiving the invoice at the various matters, maybe you have 3 or 4 matters for this October webinar, but they're all going to be, all of them all those invoices for those various matters should go to Mike Webster. You don't have to create a contact or associate a contact at the matter level. That's what a lot of people end up doing that gets them into trouble, I think, with contacts here is, so we have our October webinar 1 as the name of the actual matter. And there's contacts here. You don't have to associate Mike Webster or the Randy Grossman as contacts if you know that Mike Webster should be receiving all invoices. No matter how many matters you might have for this client, you don't need to touch it here. Because what TimeSolv does when you actually generate those draft invoices, it first looks at the matter level and says, are there any contacts associated at the matter level? In this case, no. No contacts, either optional or main at the matter level. Let's go up 1 level now to the client. Is there anybody designated as optional invoice? Yes. Mike Webster, boom. His name and contact information is going to be on the invoice. If no, it would go up to main. I hope that makes sense. What we have found is that a lot of people do is they will end up creating a duplicate contact that they feel like they have to associate at the matter level as well as at the client level. And you don't need to do that. It doesn't have to be done. If you'd like to, it is simple enough. You can go to your matter. You can click on the matter here, go to contacts, and say, okay, let's first search for all of them. And there is Randy Grossman. Let's associate him now. Oh, that's why I didn't come up that first time, because I spelled out now I understand. I didn't realize that when I was first searching and showing you how you can bring up an existing contact and associate them with the matter, and it wasn't bringing up October's because I called it Oct webinar, not October webinar. You can see that Randy Grossman is associated with October webinar. Fine, save that association. Okay, and let's see, is it going to show me? Let's go to page 2 here. Here's October webinar, and then here's October webinar 1. So you could associate him with this matter if you'd like as main as well, but you don't have to. You don't have to. So now we can see, who's associated. Randy Grossman now is associated both just at the client level and this particular matter, but you don't have to. Okay, and you don't need to create a whole new contact. That's what people end up, like I said, getting into trouble. So I hope that that's clear about how you can associate the contacts and the contacts that are going to be created on and placed on the invoice. Now, if we want to talk a little bit about those two other options that you saw, they don't have anything to do, and by two other options, let me back up and I'll show you what I mean. So we have our contacts. You can see he's listed here twice, Randy, now, but it's the same contact, but we're going to go and edit the contact, and we had those main and optional invoice are the only two that are related to the name that'll actually be on an invoice. Related party and other are only purely for your benefit. If you have some other party that you want to associate with the client for whatever reason, or just call it other, these don't get used a whole lot within our system. Okay, so now if you feel like you have created a duplicate contact, if you go back under clients to contacts here, you'll notice that there is a link up here called potentially duplicate contacts. You click on that and TimeSolv is going to automatically search for who it looks like based on email and name are going to be duplicates and how many are there. Okay, so this one I have Laura Miller. I have two contacts with the name Laura Miller and this email address. Let's look at the details. And you can then look at the associations. This one is associated with the Landry and Company client in the matter Plano Road. This one here, this Laura Miller is associated with a couple of different clients. So then you can determine what you want to do with this. You could say, yeah, let's merge these and merge it into this being kind of the main contact, or maybe you want to do this one because this has the address, then you would just merge those contacts together. So that's how you deal with duplicate contacts. Okay. Any questions at this point? If you do, go ahead and throw them in the chat right now before we move on to our next topic. Okay, great. Well, what I'm going to do then is let's move on. And the next topic that we want to talk about, I did get a question from Ramona. Is there a way to include the email address on the invoice itself? I assume that's what you mean, like actually so the person sees their email address on the invoice? No, I believe it's only the physical address that's going to show up on the invoice. If you obviously want to email the invoice to the client, that's another issue. You got to make sure first you have an email associated with the contact. Then you also need to make sure that you have designated for this particular client and the matter that the way they're going to receive their invoice is going to be by email. So you go to any client, any matter, hit invoice settings, and you can check here, I want it to be email. So then either the optional invoice person or the person who's the main contact has to have an email address associated with their contact record, if that's what you mean. But no, the email address itself is not going to show up on the invoice. It's just going to be the main address, mailing address. Okay, so let's move on now and talk about our next topic. The flexible billing template. So we're going to talk about where you can edit the billing templates and how to apply different templates to clients and matters. Actually, I think I'm going to flip-flop that and talk first about applying templates to your clients and matters. So let's go there first. So first of all, under your clients and matter settings, under invoice settings, you will designate what's going to be the default template that is going to, every time you create a new client or matter, you want to assign to that client and matter. And we have, when you get TimeSolv, the default one is flexible billing template. Okay, so that's going to be by default the one that's in place. So every time you create a whole new client and matter, like let's go to that October webinar client that we just created earlier. And if you go to invoice settings, you'll see it's, by default here. If you know for this client, there's going to be a different template that you want to use for them, this is where you would designate it before you even create any matters. So you could, because again, if I change it here, it's not going to necessarily change it for any of my existing matters, and you can change it for the matter itself. So in this case, I want to use the split billing template, let's say, and I hit save. Now, any new matter that I create from here on out will, let's do that. Let's create October webinar 2. Look at the invoice settings for October webinar 2, and you can see it's using the split billing template. But if I go back to October webinar 1, oops, didn't mean to go that far back. Because I created that matter already before I changed the client default, you're going to notice it's still using the flexible billing template. Again, this is another, a little side topic, but any changes you make, like default settings, they are not retroactively applied, generally speaking, to already existing clients, matters, time entries, expense entries, whatever it might be. So if you go in and change global settings, or settings anywhere, don't expect it to be retroactively applied. Okay, so I think that's always an important thing. People get sometimes confused, like, well, geez, I changed the setting. How come this client still shows it like this? It's like, well, it's going to do it for every future client or matter, whatever it might be. So that's how you actually apply the billing template to clients, and how you would apply a different billing template to a client or matter. Okay, so you could do it at the matter level, you could do it at the client level. Once you do it at the client level, every future matter that you create for that client will take over its client settings. But let's talk about how you actually edit the billing template itself. So if you go under invoices to settings, you have a tab here called flexible templates. Click there. When you first open up TimeSolv out of the box, there's 3 billing templates already set up: fixed fee time and expense, fixed fee time only, and our flexible billing template. What we often recommend is, if you're going to do a lot of editing, keep this, or you want to experiment, keep this one as is and just make a copy of it and then play around with it. In this case, like for example, I have a client, Travis Erickson. I've created a specific flexible billing template for him because of his particular needs or what he asked for, whatever it could be. So any one of these, to actually edit the template, you just simply click on it. And this brings up a pop-up window, which is going to show you have a lot of different tabs here. And we have first the global setting tab. I'm not going to go through every single setting here and every single, box that you can check. It's a lot of it is fairly self-explanatory about what you can or cannot, or what you can or what you choose not to include in your invoices. This is also the new places where we've added things like how I want my font to look. Do I want to justify the time entry descriptions and expense entry descriptions, for example? But then you have in order here, essentially, how the invoice itself will roll. Do you want a cover page? You don't have to, but you could, in this case, on this template, I've unchecked that box, but you could check it and you could have a cover page that is included. If you don't want a cover page, fine, uncheck this box. The main page is the page that we call is the main invoice. That's where you see like the time entries, the expense entries, the totals, all of those sort of things. But you can choose, do I want a logo on that page? Do I want to include the firm address? Do I want to include the client address? And this is where, as you can see, back to your original question, Ramona, you don't get the option of including the email address itself. It's just going to include the actual physical mailing address. So there's all sorts of things that you can include on this main page. How do you want your time entries to look? And there's all sorts, again, options. You can group the time entries, but you can see there's lots of different ways you can group them. You can change what the title is of your time entry section. By default, it's called time summary. You can call it whatever you want. You can decide, how am I going to identify the professional? A lot of people like using just initials for some reason on invoices. If that's what you want to do, that's fine. So there's all these various options that you have with your time entries. Expense entries is very similar. If you're doing split billing, do you want to have a split billing summary or not? What do you want to call it? Some people like to include the statement of account page. Some people don't. This is where you can decide, I don't want to include the statement of account page. It gets too big. But if you do, here's all the various things you can include on that page. And then same thing with the remittance page. Some firms don't like to include a remittance page, but so they can just uncheck this box or check it, whatever you want to do. Okay, you're going to find that I was using this Travis Erickson one. The default flexible billing template is going to have all of these pages turned on. And it's just a matter of you deciding, do I want a statement page or not? If you don't want it, turn it off and you don't have to have it. If you have any more detailed questions about the very specific things on here and how it affects what is seen on an invoice, please always feel free to call into support, set up a support session, book one for the time and date that works best for you. Whatever it might be, best way to get a hold of support is with those two mechanisms. Either you can do a chat, you can send an email to support@timesolv.com. You can always book out a support session too. One last quick thing that I want to note, and I know I've showed this before in passing when we've been talking about how to edit invoices. But when you're looking at draft invoices, and let's say you're going to, obviously you guys hopefully all remember that you click on the dollar amount when you want to actually edit a draft. Right here again, when you go to edit a draft, this will show you the template that's being used. And if you decide, I don't want to use the flexible billing template, you can choose a new one. Or you can edit the template right from here, which is a nice little feature. You don't have to go back under invoices and settings and click on the flexible billing template tab and do all that. You can just simply click edit right here and edit the flexible billing template or whatever template you're using right here if you'd like. So a nice little feature, saves on some clicks, I think, in order is that you edit the template, and that'll happen in real time then. So for example, I'm using the flexible billing template. Let's hit download real quick for this one, and we'll take a look, and I'll show you what I really mean by that. So I'm going to open up this invoice, and it's got, this is the main invoice page here, and here's my statement of account. Oh, but you know what? God, this statement account is super long, or I've decided I don't want to do a remittance page, period, end of story. So I'm going to come in here and edit the billing template. Or, the other thing you could do here is if you know that this, other billing template doesn't have the remittance page, choose that template. There's always that. But I'm going to edit this one here, and you can see in real time as I go into this remittance page, I'm saying, nope, uncheck this box, update it. Boom, it's been updated. Let's download another draft copy. So now we just generated a second draft. And you're going to see we have a statement of account, but no remittance page like we did before. So it will in real time. This is one of those cases where if you edit the billing template, it will retroactively for the draft invoices, update the draft invoice to display in whatever the most updated billing template features are. So I guess I contradicted myself a little bit in talking about the fact that most cases, this is one of the few cases I can think of actually where you can change a setting, if you will, like a setting within a billing template, and it will be applied immediately to already existing draft invoices. So that's a nice feature. Okay, so that's flexible billing templates. Again, I didn't get into all the details about, what each of those checkboxes does, but this is a way to know where you can apply it to your clients and matters, how to apply it to different templates to different matters, where you can edit them and so on. So let's move on to our next topic then, and I believe it was going to be about adding interest to an invoice. So first, we're going to look at how you enable interest for future clients, and this is one of those retroactive versus things that doesn't happen versus, and then existing clients, and then this is wrong. This button is from, or this bullet point is from another. I apologize. I didn't delete this from my last PowerPoint from last month. So ignore that. We'll talk about how to enable interest for future clients and existing clients and how you can set your interest that you're going to charge. So let's get into that right now. Okay, so first of all, if you want to charge interest to all your clients and matters, you would, again, go under settings here. Go to your invoice settings. And there's a box here where you'd simply check saying apply interest. And you would check that box and you would include the interest rate. Now, here's where it gets tricky. And I'll be perfectly frank. I don't love this part of TimeSolv. I think it's difficult to understand, well, how is the interest rate being calculated? Intuitively, most people think, well, if it's monthly, then I'm charging 1.5%. I'm going to put in 1.5% here, but that's not the case. This field, and by default, we're charging interest rate on a annual basis. So if you want to charge whatever number you put in here, just know that it's going to calculate interest on a yearly basis. So if you want to do 1.5% interest or 5% interest on an unpaid invoice that gets added once a month, you need to basically multiply that by 12. So if I want to, that's why I had 18 in here. If I wanted to have 1.5% interest each month added to an unpaid invoice, I would multiply that by 12 and get to 18. We put 18 in here because that's the example I'll just use. Grace period is fairly, self-explanatory. TimeSolv will not start applying and charging interest to a client until 30 days after the grace period. Now, if you have payment terms of net 15, that means the grace period, or essentially interest, will not get charged for 45 days after you actually send the invoice. If you do it upon receipt, then we'll start charging interest exactly 30 days after you send the invoice. So hopefully that makes sense to everybody. If you do net 30, for example, you asked for it to be paid within 30 days, the grace period is 30. That means we won't start charging interest until 60 days. So, and so on and so forth. And you can change this to whatever you want it to be. You could say 0. Grace period, so that if you're at a net 30 and they don't pay within 30 days, the next day, day 31, after you sent the invoice, it'll start accumulating the interest. So then that automatically gets calculated when you send a new invoice with new things. That will then have the interest, if there's a current balance or a balance that hasn't been paid, with the interest on there. And this is the nice new feature then as well with that we just implemented a couple of weeks ago excuse me, is if you have a client in matter that they have not paid their invoice, but they are not part of the billing period that you're working on, like say this past September, it will generate what is called an interest-only invoice. It will show that, yes, in this 30-day period, you had, an unpaid invoice, so we've added 1.5% to that unpaid balance, and it'll generate the invoice and send it to them. So the other thing too, now keep in mind, as I mentioned before, we're going to hit save here. This would be now the setting. If I check this box, I hit interest rate of 18%. I have a grace period of 0 days. I hit save. Any of my existing clients are not going to necessarily see this all of a sudden have interest applied. It will by default for any new client it'll start applying interest when there's based on these, this criteria here. So if you need to, or you want to, again, here's the other thing too, perhaps there's certain clients, maybe they're going to be a troubled client paying, whatever it might be. You, in general, by default, don't charge interest, but you do want to charge interest for a specific client and matter. You would go to that particular client and matter. Let's say October webinar. I'm going to go to my invoice settings for that particular client, and you'll see it. This is basically looks the same as what you saw in the default. I'm just going to check this box and hit do whatever, change the setting however I want, interest rate and the grace period and then payment terms and so on, and hit save. But again, doing it here is not going to affect my existing matters. So I turned it on for this client, but if I go look at my matters that already are in place, I go to invoice settings, you can see, oh, you don't have the option, sorry, with the interest. Actually, I take that back. That is correct now, that if you turn on interest for an existing client, that makes sense, because if you generate new invoices now, then it'll start calculating interest based on the criteria you set. But if you have obviously sent invoices and a balance due, I don't believe it's going to start, or actually you can have interest start date here, right there. Oh, hello, Scott. Why don't you look at this? You can say, hey, I want to have the interest start, for this. Perhaps there's like 3 or 4 invoices outstanding here, and you've told them, I'm going to start charging you interest now. You can do that here. Okay. You could say you're going to go into the invoice settings and turn on for the client that you're going to charge interest and the interest start date. If you have any questions about this, again, make sure you check with our support staff, and they can help you get that straightened out. Interest can get a little tricky, I know, especially if you're applying it on the fly and you haven't always done that. As you can see, I hadn't realized that you couldn't turn it on specifically at the matter level, but you can put in the interest start date once you've gone ahead and enabled it at the client level under invoice settings. Okay. One last topic then for the day. Let's talk about LawPay. Oh, I didn't do a tip number 4 slide. Sloppy, Scott. Okay, well, we'll talk about the LawPay integration. And LawPay, as I mentioned at the start, is kind of the de facto credit card processor for the legal industry. And a way, as I said before, you can take ACH payments or have money deducted directly from a bank account. So there's a couple things that you have to do within both LawPay. And first of all, you have to have a LawPay account, obviously. So you would just go to lawpay.com and work with them in setting up your account. The one thing that's nice about LawPay is they allow you credit card payments or ACH payments to be deposited directly into your trust accounts, which is why LawPay is so popular with lawyers, is you don't have to do that. If you take a PayPal or payments or Stripe or whatever, where it dumps it into your operating account and then you got to move it from the operating account into your trust account. And this saves you those steps. So they're very much in trust compliant. Their trust compliancy is fantastic, which is why so many lawyers like to use them. So once you get your LawPay account set up, the first thing you want to do, I'm going to go ahead and log into my LawPay account. By the way, this is a complete aside. Excuse me, a complete aside. But I don't know about you all, but we all have a million passwords to manage, and I happen to use one called Dashlane, and it installs this extension right on my my Chrome browser. It's fantastic because it generates these really hard passwords. all you have to remember is the one big master password you create. And I have hundreds of various accounts, both for work and my personal life, set up in this dash lane. And now I just simply I just looked up LawPay. I'm going to click on it. It's going to automatically go to the login page. It's going to automatically enter my email and password. As you can see, it's logging me in automatically. It's an awesome tool. There's several out there like it. I've used another one called Common Key, but Dashlane is, it's a lifesaver as far as speed of logging into various accounts. So anyway, that's my little, I don't work for Dashlane. I actually found out about it from my dad. So it's kind of funny. So anyway, let's go ahead and take a look at once you're logged into your LawPay account. Oh, Tony said he mentions, yeah, LastPass. I've heard of LastPass. I mean, if you guys don't have a tool in place for managing your passwords, boy, it's just a lifesaver to do it. But LastPass is another one I've heard good things about as well. So once you're in LawPay, logged into your LawPay account, you need to go to the place to actually grab some particular credentials. So what you do is you want to go under your username, which is located over here in the upper right-hand corner, and go down to Settings. And then once you're in the settings, you want to go to this area called Developers. Now, the next thing you have to do, this has already been done here, is you have to authorize TimeSolv application. I've already done it on this test account, but you would go under and click on this button here that says Authorize Application. It's going to bring up a pull-down menu that's going to show all the integration partners that LawPay has, and you would choose TimeSolv. Obviously, TimeSolv isn't here right now because I've already set this up. And once it is set up, then it'll show you here the list of authorized applications. The next step you want to take is you want to click here where it says Show Credentials. Now, when it brings up this pop-up window, there's test credentials you can use when you're setting this up, and there's also the live credentials. I'm going to use the test ones because, you know, we're in the process of, we don't have a real account with LawPay. This is a test account with LawPay. What you want to do when you see all of this information here is, most importantly, you'll see all the accounts that you have set up. In this case, we have an operating merchant account. We have a trust merchant account. We have an ACH test account. This is for taking those bank, essentially getting paid by check electronically. But what you want to grab right here is the test secret key, or if you're doing the live credentials, the actual live secret key. So we're just going to go ahead. I'm going to highlight it, and I'm going to hit, Control C to copy, or I'm going to right click and hit copy. So we have that in place. Now I'm going to go back to TimeSolv. I'm going to go under my payments screen here to settings. This is where you set up enable your trust account. This is also where you set up your bank accounts. I'm sure most of you already have this in place. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a whole new operating account. You can see I have several. I already have so I'm going to create a new bank account here. We're going to call it, operating account. For the type, is it going to be a trust account or operating? It's going to be an operating account. The bank name is, let's just say First Bank of Clayson. It's going to be active, and it's not my default. I'm going to hit save. And you can see you can add as many bank accounts as you'd like. But more importantly, once you do that, you can create your payment profile over here. So we want to click on that, create payment profile. Payment provider, as of right now, LawPay is the only one that we integrate with, so that's your only choice. And this is where you now want to click here and paste in your secret key that we copied in LawPay itself. So I'm going to do Command V, or you can hit right click and paste. And you can see when I do that, it changes here. And now I'm choosing, okay, which LawPay account do I want to associate this payment profile with? And then you have your option, either your operating account or your trust account. In this case, I'm going to say my operating merchant account. And which ACH account do I want to use? I'm just going to pick one of them here, and I'm going to hit save. So now, as you can see, I have these payment profiles already in place. So now the next step is to make sure that you have that enabled for our client portal. I'm not going to go through all the details about getting the client portal in place today. I've done that in some other webinars. This is more about making sure that you have your LawPay integration set up with the client portal. So you want to go under clients here to settings. And at the bottom of our general screen here, you'll see client portal, and you first need to make sure it's enabled. And then more importantly, where do you want to receive portal payments? And in this case, it's the operating account. Well, which operating bank account? I'm going to do, say, a bank account 4, the one I just created. This is also where you can choose to have your trust accounts. If you want to create, if you want your trust balances to get paid when paying invoices, you can do that here as well. And I'm going to hit save. Now I'm going to go into as if I'm a TimeSolv, you know, I'm one of your clients, and you've just sent me, you've given me portal, you know, login credentials, all of that. I can access, and I want to pay an invoice to you. I want to pay you now. And I get the email with the invoice with a link that says, click here to, in fact, I'll show you what it, when you first set up somebody in the portal itself, they get an email that looks like this. A portal account has been created for you. Click here to log in. And this is from the name of my firm, Laidlaw and Associates. So when you do that, you click on that, it's going to take you to an interface that looks like this. And this is the name of the particular contact I have, Jack Youngblood. And I can see that this is, you know, the name of my firm. So this would be the name of your firm. This is the name of the client, Longfellow Association. And you can see then I have a bunch of invoices I need to pay. Okay, so you can, again, you can, a quick run through the portal, you can also give access so that people can look at, oh, I don't have access. Okay, hang on, let me click on that again. I don't believe I had it set it up to have them be able to, oh yeah, I did. So they could view time entries. They can look at, you can look at unbilled ones only. So this, you could allow, in theory, people to see the work in progress, so they can anticipate what their upcoming bill is going to look like. If you wanted to give them that power, you don't have to. You can say, show me all time entries that have been billed. They could look at those. You can look at expenses as well. They could also view any payment history they might have with you in the portal here. And more importantly, this is where they can actually pay those invoices. So if they want to pay a particular invoice, select invoices to pay. They could also list, if they even click on the invoice number, it's going to download the PDF again for them. You can see it downloaded here, so they can look at it. If they click on the dollar amount here, it takes them to show more detail, and it also will load the invoice here in this window. So there's lots of different ways to view the invoice. Then they can also just click pay right here, or they could go back to invoices and they could select a couple of invoices they want to pay at once. As soon as you, if you notice, this is grayed out. As soon as I check the box here, now I have the option to pay. And so you simply just click on this green pay button. Now you have the two options, because you have the two, you have your credit card merchant account set up with LawPay, and you have that ACH payment. So if they want to pay via bank account, they could click here, put in all those, the routing number, account number, whether it's going to be from checking, you know, if there's a savings, that type of thing, and so on, and submit payment. And that shows you what they, you know, they're paying multiple invoices. So here's the amount that they're paying. It's right here. Or they can pay via credit card number, everything. So this is actually what you're viewing here is LawPay's interface, basically. This is all being run by LawPay, not by us, but they're paying it via our portal. So this is a fantastic way to make sure you get paid quickly. As soon, in theory, you could get paid within minutes of you actually sending your invoices, either via credit card, or if you're not a firm that's ready to take, that doesn't want to take credit cards because of the payment fees and so on, maybe set up LawPay. Yes, you got to pay for it. I understand that, but it's worth it to allow them to pay via check electronically. So you don't have to wait for literally the check to be in the mail. They can pay via check right here. And then the nice thing about this is that now once they pay, your invoice over in TimeSolv here is going to be automatically marked as paid and allocated. So you don't have to go back in and record a payment, you know, allocate it to an invoice and do all that work. It's done for you by using the client portal specifically. I know we have a ton of clients that use LawPay, they use TimeSolv, obviously, but they don't have the two married together. So what they're doing instead is LawPay gives you the ability to, you can send your clients a LawPay link and they can pay an invoice via that LawPay link. But then you still have to come into TimeSolv, record the payment as a credit card payment, allocate it towards an invoice, and blah, blah, blah. But if you have the two married together, that all happens at once, saving yourself a lot of time and steps. So I highly encourage you guys, if you're not using LawPay, there is a transaction fee and a monthly fee. And I'll just tell you the inside tip is that the monthly fee that they charge is usually negotiable. Their processing fee isn't, but it's, they'll be more than happy to help you get set up. And it's what they do. They're accredited by or endorsed by, I think, almost all 50 state bar associations in the US now have, I think it's in the high 40s, have basically endorsed LawPay. So, okay. So that's all I have for today's Wednesday webinar. We've gone about 50 minutes or so, so we're within our time frame. Would love to know if people have any questions. Oh, looks like Tony does have a question. How much access does a client have through the client portal? Tony, that's a great question. And that's this down here. When you're in your clients and settings, and I'm going to have to log back in now because I was looking at TimeSolv as this person, Jack Youngblood. So let me log back in because that's a good question. You definitely don't have to let them see anything other than their invoice that they have to pay. So when you go under clients and settings, when you come down here, this is where like time visibility, do you want them to see anything? In this case, I had it set for all entries, which is why I could see unbilled work or say the work in progress. You could say, no, I just want them to see time entries that have been billed or just not at all. And same thing with expense entries. If this is the case, then you hit save. And if I go back to, this should work. I haven't tested this. If I go back to that same client portal now with Jack Youngblood, notice the tabs are different here. You don't see time and expense like you saw before, right? You only see the invoices to pay and my payment history. So you can, again, make it as visible as you'd like, including even seeing unbilled work. You can have them see just the invoices, or you can have them see the only time expense entries that have been placed on previous invoices. So yeah, good question, Tony. Do we have to change the settings for each client? No, in fact, you actually don't have the option. This is one of those things where the client portal said, I believe, let me double check that. You just saw that this was retroactive. So you saw that as I changed this to not visible and I went back in as for somebody who already had client portal access, it did update it automatically. So it is another one of those cases where it did retroactively apply that. What I'm not 100% sure of is if I want a particular client, like maybe I want a particular client to see something that's not the default. Oh, I have to log back in again. That's a good question. I actually haven't tested that before. So I've just changed the settings so that my clients cannot see any time or expense entries. But what if I want one particular client to see something? So let's go into, gosh, I'm trying to think if there's one I know already has portal access. Oh, there was that Longfellow. So let's go to that one. It was that Jack Youngblood. Let's go back to him. Yeah, it was Longfellow Association. The neighborhood I live in Minneapolis is a Longfellow neighborhood, so that's why I have this dummy. And you give client access at so let's look at invoice settings. That might be where it's at. Nope, invoice delivery. Okay, it's not there. So I'm pretty sure, so we're going to edit Jack Youngblood. Okay, so it is all just at the you know, the default settings for all of your clients and matters is where you choose to have to display time entries, expense entries, and so on. You can't say, no, for this one client, I want them to be able to see all the time entries or whatever it might be. Would a client get more access by having a portal login? No, that's just simply an option. We make it optional whether you want the client to actually require them to actually log in and actually create a username and password. It's one more layer of security. So you could say, yeah, I want to have them, you can create a login name and give them a dummy password, and then they could go in and change the password themselves. And that's, again, when you go under settings here, you can say, do I want to log in required to view the portal or not? I unchecked it just because it's easier when I'm doing this work here. If you want your client portal to be username and password protected from your, by your clients, which a lot of them maybe feel more comfortable with that, you can certainly check that box and then give them a username and password to access and so on. But that doesn't mean that they're going to be able to get more access. It's really, these are the things that they'll have access to. For time entries, you have your 3 options as I showed you, Tony, and then for expense options as well. These are all good questions. I'll probably do another, deeper dive into the client portal itself and all the settings in another webinar here, somewhat soon. In this scenario, I was just I wanted to show about how to hook up LawPay specifically, because again, even if you don't have, even if you're not going to receive payments, like if you hit no option selected here, you still want your clients to see things, like you want them to see, all the entries and so on. You can do that. You don't have to have the client portal purely be just a payment portal. It could be a portal where they see other, the time entries and invoices and so on. So you can see I save this, they can't actually make a payment. So let's go again back in and see how that affects what your client sees. So you can see I can still see these invoices, but again, I don't have that pay option like I did before. And if I go to select them, and all I can do is download them, I can just view it. So again, you can let your clients see whatever you want. They just can't pay, that pay button isn't there because I've disconnected the payment option, okay, by saying here, that's where you do it. So again, it's still, I think, a nice tool, even if you don't accept those credit card payments and if you don't use LawPay. It's a nice way to allow your clients a way to access all the past invoices that they may have made. And of course, if we turned on those time and expense entries, they'd see that as well. But this alone, I think, is a valuable tool. So again, it saves, this is, to me, I'm getting a little, we only have a couple minutes left, but this is a nice way to save on people calling into your office and saying, oh, can you resend that invoice from back in October or March of, this month? I can't seem to find any more. I deleted the email. Well, if they have a client portal access, they could just log into the client portal and come find every invoice that they've ever done. They can even sort it by paid or unpaid. They can see like, oh crap, I have $6,000 or, worth of invoices yet to pay. So even if you don't accept the credit card payments, I think the client portal brings a lot of value to your clients and allowing them a lot more visibility into the work you've done for them. All right, we are wrapping up here. We're just a couple minutes in front of 1 o'clock. I do have this set where as soon as the recording of this has been processed, you should receive an email with a link to rewatch this again. So you can take a look if there's things I went too fast on or whatever the case may be. You can always go back and view it. And I hope that you guys saw a lot of value and got some things out of today's webinar. And again, mark your calendars. We'll do it the second Wednesday of November, which is November 14th. And I hope you guys have a great rest of the week, great rest of October. Happy Halloween, all that good stuff. And we'll see you next month. Thanks, everybody.